Diego Lopez and Jean Silva will be headlining the UFC Fight Night card for Mexican Independence Day, which will be happening on September 13th. And this is going to be a very pivotal matchup in the featherweight division. Obviously, you have Jean Silva surging through the featherweight division. I think he's on like a 5-fight win streak. And then you have Diego Lopez. He just recently lost a title fight against Alexander Volkanovski, which was a very close bout. Alexander Volkanovski, he clearly won, but that fight was very competitive. And I think Diego Lopez put up a very good performance against a all-time great in Alexander Volkanovski. But going back to this matchup, I am a huge fan of Diego Lopez. He's honestly my favorite fighter in the featherweight division right now. And we're going to be breaking down the matchup between Diego Lopez and Jean Silva. I usually tell you guys who I'm picking towards the end of this video, but as you guys can tell by the title of this video, spoiler alert, I'm going to be picking Jean Silva to win this matchup, but we're still going to be breaking down the ins and outs of this matchup, and I'm going to basically explain why Jean Silva is simply a stylistic nightmare for someone like Diego Lopez. But before we even talk about the matchup, I just want to mention that this should have been Diego Lopez versus Yair Rodriguez headlining the Mexican Independence Day card. It just makes more sense. They had that big altercation at the press conference. I don't know how the UFC fumbled this matchup, but actually, I heard it was Yair Rodriguez who turned down the fight between Diego Lopez because he thought he was going to get a title shot. But after Lerone Murphy obliterated Aaron Pico at UFC 319, I'm pretty sure Yair Rodriguez isn't even on the matchmakers' minds when it comes to the title picture at featherweight. However, I still think that Diego Lopez and Yair Rodriguez can still be made even if Diego Lopez loses, so hopefully that fight will eventually be made in the future. But without further ado, let's hop into this breakdown between Diego Lopez versus Jean Silva, starting with Diego Lopez. Diego Lopez has a professional MMA record of 26 wins and 7 losses, and he's 5'11 with a 72.5-inch reach. He's absolutely huge for the featherweight division, and his towering physique and his physicality makes him a tough challenge for most featherweights in the division. Diego Lopez is a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu specialist. He has a strong Jiu-Jitsu base. He can latch up submissions from almost any position. And when he first entered into the UFC, it was a short notice bout against Movsar Evloev. Even though he lost that matchup, he really gave Movsar a tough fight when Movsar was a ranked featherweight and Diego Lopez was making his debut. And after his loss to Movsar Evloev, I believe he went on a 5-fight win streak in the featherweight division, and that win streak eventually culminated in him getting a title shot at UFC 314. And like we discussed, he lost to Alexander Volkanovski, but he put on a very competitive fight, and he really earned my respect in that matchup. That was a really tough fight, and to give one of the all-time greats in Alexander Volkanovski that type of fight, that just shows how good of a contender Diego Lopez really is. When you're talking about Diego Lopez's strengths, you have to talk about that elite jiu-jitsu, and he has a lot of good submission setups. He was able to submit Gavin Tucker with a triangle, and he has really good guillotines as well. He's very dangerous off his back. He's always threatening submissions off his back. And he has a durable chin against tough competition. He's been knocked out one time in his career, I believe way before he was even in the UFC, but I don't think Diego Lopez has ever been really badly hurt in the UFC. Another thing that makes Diego Lopez so good is his aggressive striking that complements his grappling. Diego Lopez, he's a powerful striker, very powerful. He has dynamite in his hands. He's knocked out plenty of opponents. A fighter that comes to mind is that Sadiq Yusuf win at UFC 300. His performance at UFC 300 really earned him a lot of fans. He put on the best performance of his career at the time in front of the biggest crowd, the most high profile UFC event, and he knocked out Sadiq Yusuf in the first round. Those uppercuts in the clinch were absolutely deadly. And another strength we have to mention is not only is he a powerful striker, he is a very fast twitch striker. He's very fast. And a fight that comes to mind is his win against Brian Ortega in the first round when he absolutely cracked Brian Ortega with like a two-piece combination. When they were kind of like feeling each other out in the first round, Diego Lopez, he hit him with this fast and powerful two-piece. Brian Ortega, he didn't even see it coming, and he almost knocked out Brian Ortega, who is one of the toughest fighters in the featherweight division, and he almost finished him in the first round. He still won the fight. The fight ended up going to a decision, but that just shows how powerful and how fast Diego Lopez is when it comes to striking. And another strength of Diego Lopez is his great finishing instincts. Diego Lopez, he does go to decisions every once in a while, but really, Diego Lopez is a finisher. Once he senses blood in the water, he keeps going, he keeps pouring on, and that's what really makes him such an exciting fighter as well. Now, when we talk about some weaknesses of Diego Lopez, he does have a few weaknesses. I would say his first weakness is that sometimes he can get a little bit too comfortable off his back. That is kind of a problem for a lot of fighters who are really comfortable with their jiu-jitsu skills. They kind of think they can work way more stuff off their back because in jiu-jitsu, you can really set up a lot of submissions off your back in jiu-jitsu, but in MMA, being on your back is like the worst position you can be in. So a lot of fighters who have that jiu-jitsu pedigree, they're really good off their back, but they don't have that same urgency to get up like other fighters. Another weakness is that Diego Lopez, his striking defense can be a little bit leaky. Sometimes he takes damages in exchanges, and some people might refer to him as a marauder. He does try to move forward and just use his durability as a weapon, and this could potentially get him knocked out, especially since he never fought anyone with the power, precision, and timing of Jean Silva. And I would say another weakness of Diego Lopez is that he did get his momentum halted after that loss to Alexander Volkanovski. I say this because a big reason that Diego Lopez got that title shot for the vacant belt is because he was being so active, and since he was winning so much, his confidence was growing each fight, and he basically out-activityed other featherweight contenders to earn a shot at the belt, even though he did lose to Movsar Evloev in his debut. And another weakness is that he's susceptible to uppercuts while striking. Sometimes he just like ducks his head down and throws with you in the pocket. So I think he's very open to uppercuts in those type of exchanges. Now moving on to Diego Lopez's opponent on September 13th, which is going to be Jean Silva. Jean Silva, he has a professional MMA record of 16 wins and 2 losses, and he is 5'7" with a 69-inch reach. While those stats aren't absolutely absurd for the featherweight division, he is very strong for the featherweight division. He's very big, not in height. He doesn't really have that range and that height advantage over most of his opponents, but he's a very strong featherweight. He's very grounded. He can defend takedowns, and his size does play a factor in why he is such a good featherweight contender right now. And as you guys should know, Jean Silva trains out of the Fighting Nerds gym. Some of his colleagues, like Mauricio Ruffi and Kyle Barajo, will be fighting on the fight card in Paris a week before this fight on Mexican Independence Day. But going back to Jean Silva's actual style, he is a dynamic Brazilian striker with a slight Muay Thai influence. He has explosive knockout power showcased in his UFC debut and plenty of other UFC performances. And he really represents that next wave of featherweight talent in the featherweight division. Now, when we take a look at Jean Silva's strengths, he is a very sharp, powerful striker with knockout ability in both hands. He has good forward pressure, and his ability to trap his opponents in certain moments, he just has a high fighting IQ. Like the way that he can analyze his opponents and create traps in the striking, you can see why he's one of the best fighters in the Fighting Nerds right now. Jean Silva, he also has solid defensive grappling. He's not easy to take down. A lot of these strikers, they're a 10 out of 10 on the feet, but when they get taken to the ground, they have nothing to offer. Jean Silva, he doesn't allow his opponents to even take him to the ground. He has excellent takedown defense. I don't think he's been taken down. Actually, I think Bryce Mitchell took him down when they fought, and Jean Silva, he was able to get right back up. And as you guys know, he eventually submitted Bryce Mitchell with that ninja choke, so his grappling is up to par to compete with the upper echelon of the featherweight division. Obviously, another strength for Jean Silva is that he's very young, he's athletic, and he has good enough cardio to keep a good pace, and he controls the pace of his fights as well. And the biggest strength of Jean Silva, in my opinion, is that he is a master at distance management, which is a really big strength shared by all fighters in the Fighting Nerds gym. Now, when we talk about some of the weaknesses that Jean Silva has, he does have a few weaknesses. First, I would say that he's still relatively untested against top level competition. Bryce Mitchell, at the time that he fought him, which is Jean Silva's most high profile win, I believe Bryce Mitchell was like number 13, number 12, around that range in the featherweight division. So we never really seen Jean Silva against a top 10 featherweight or a top 5 featherweight. And this fight against Diego Lopez is going to be his first time fighting a fighter at that level in the featherweight division. Next thing I would say is that even though his grappling defense is solid, I would say that he's unproven against fighters with that elite jiu-jitsu who are really jiu-jitsu specialists like Diego Lopez. Diego Lopez, he could lash up a submission at any time. And Jean Silva, he hasn't really fought anyone that has the jiu-jitsu of someone like Diego Lopez. Another thing that could be a weakness for Jean Silva is that he does keep his hands low, which is effective for the way that he fights since it's hard for his opponents to read where his strikes are coming from. But at the end of the day, keeping your guard up is fundamental defensive positioning that it's hard to say that this is not a weakness that could be taken advantage of by more technical or more unpredictable strikers. And his last weakness that I would say is that Jean Silva, in his fights, he kind of plays with his opponents, which can be a sign of him being like very overconfident in his fights. While he might be able to like get in his opponent's heads acting that way against lower levels of competition, now he's moving up to championship caliber fighters who won't let any of that phase them. And Diego Lopez, he's so fast twitch. If Jean Silva lets his guard down for a moment, he can get caught with something big. But now, let's hop into the stylistic clash that will be happening in this fight. I think this is going to be more of a different take on the striker versus grappler dynamic because Diego Lopez, I would say he's a heavy grappler with very good striking. And Jean Silva, I would say he's a heavy striker with underrated grappling. So it's going to be a different interaction than that classic striker versus grappler archetype that a lot of fights have. And when you're analyzing this type of matchup, you have to ask, can Diego Lopez close the distance and get Jean Silva to the mat before eating too much damage? I think it would be in Diego Lopez's best interest to take Jean Silva down in this matchup because Jean Silva's knockout power is so dangerous. But Diego Lopez does have the durability and relentless pace to test Jean Silva's cardio if the fight goes long. Diego Lopez, I think a lot of people underrate his cardio. I think there was a slight cardio problem, but after fighting Alexander Volkanovski and going 5 rounds and arguably winning the 5th round, I think Diego Lopez's cardio is one of his most underrated weapons going into this matchup. But now, hopping into the actual prediction for this fight, I kind of spoiled it in the beginning, but I think Jean Silva will TKO Diego Lopez. I can see this fight going like Jean Silva's fight against Drew Dober because Diego Lopez is so durable. He's going to be getting cracked And I don't see him making the adjustments since Jean Silva is such a good counter striker. But the main difference between Diego Lopez and Jean Silva is that yes, Diego Lopez does have the power on the feet, but the reason I think Jean Silva wins this matchup is because Jean Silva has timing and precision in the striking. It's like that famous Conor McGregor quote, timing beats speed and precision beats power. Diego Lopez, like I said, he is my favorite fighter in the featherweight division right now. And when you actually look at the fight and who he's going to be fighting in Jean Silva, even if he loses this matchup, I don't think it's going to be that bad because Jean Silva is such a stylistic nightmare for Diego Lopez. It's kind of like Diego Lopez, he can't really do anything. If he fights the way that he usually fights, I can just see him getting knocked out because Jean Silva is such a good striker. And I think that if Diego Lopez loses to Jean Silva, the loss is going to age well. I think Jean Silva is going to become the next featherweight champ. I think Jean Silva beats fighters like Alexander Volkanovski. I think he beats fighters like Lerone Murphy and Marzar Evloev. So I don't think this is going to be this bad stain on Diego Lopez's legacy if he loses this matchup. And I can see Diego Lopez bouncing back in the future. I think he beats Yair Rodriguez. I think he beats Arnold Allen. Contenders like that. I see Diego Lopez being a staple in that top three in the featherweight division. So, as you guys know, I'm going to be rooting for Diego Lopez in this matchup. And when you really think about the fight, I don't think Diego Lopez is 100% completely cooked in this matchup. Even though this is a bad stylistic fight for him, he does have ways to win this fight. It's weird because honestly, Diego Lopez has the abilities and skills to win by submission, TKO, or decision. He has amazing jiu-jitsu, he has power in his hands, and his striking has improved. He's going 5 rounds with a all-time great striker in Alexander Volkanovski. But what makes Diego Lopez versus Jean Silva such a stylistic nightmare for Diego Lopez is not because there's this massive skill difference between the two fighters. Both fighters are elite in different areas. What makes it such a stylistic nightmare for Diego Lopez is the difference in how they approach fighting and how they operate in the cage. Diego Lopez is going to be constantly moving forward and trying to pressure and enter into range. And like we just mentioned, Jean Silva is so good at making reads while fighting on the back foot and landing that perfect shot. I think Diego Lopez is going to have to be way more technical in the striking to have a chance. He can't get scrappy and he has to stay collected and defensive to even have a chance in this matchup. So when this fight happens, I'm definitely rooting for Diego Lopez. He's one of my favorite fighters. He's on the channel banner. I really want Diego Lopez to win, but when you look at the fight logically, I think you just have to concede that Jean Silva, his striking and his precision, is going to end up catching Diego Lopez in some moment in the fight. So that's really it for this breakdown. As usual, like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll catch you guys in my next video.